Hello everyone, and thanks once again for joining us for now Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm David Percy. And up first graphic here. Let's see, getting the right frame. There we go. Hazards weather graphic. Got a red shaded area there, Upper Tanana Valley 40 Mile Country. That's a winter storm warning for heavy snow. That goes into effect tomorrow, Wednesday, and continues through Thursday afternoon. And again, for heavy snow, and they're looking for 8 to 12 inches possible, and that's mostly south of Chicken and southeast of Delta Junction. And again, that's for Wednesday through Thursday afternoon. Could see a significant amount of snow there. And then down to the south, there's a winter storm watch out for the Copper River Basin, and that's also for heavy snow for possible 6 to 12 inches falling Wednesday afternoon and night into early Thursday morning. And that's just a possibility of seeing that significant snowfall there. And then over the southeast coast, northern Panhandle, and eastern North Gulf Coast, Yakutat, Sitka, Juneau, and all the other areas there in the shaded zone. That's a flood watch. It continues for Wednesday afternoon through Friday night, and additional heavy rain may result in some possible flooding. Otherwise, winter weather advisory out for the eastern Alaska range for wind and snow there. And then next frame here showing the yellow shaded area. That's for high surf advisories and winter weather advisories for the central and western Arctic coast. And that's out through Wednesday night. And that's for snow and winds of 40 to 50 miles per hour, creating lower visibilities and blowing snow, and several more inches possible there in those areas, as well as possible minor beach erosion due to heavy surf. And now onto satellite imagery. See a lot of clouds kind of drifting from east to west and to the south over the southeast interior, kind of southwest to northeast. And already you can see the next plume of moisture with a big low, and that's just coming onto the chart there. A lot of cirrus spreading in over Kodiak Island, southern Kenai Peninsula, and that kind of overrunning the light snow going on in the Copper River Basin. Had some showers and precipitation over much of the Panhandle in the last 12 hours. Some of that's starting to taper off. And then a weak trough there brought some moisture to the Pribilofs and bringing some showers into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coastline this afternoon. Nunivak Island right under it, and that kind of trails back into the eastern Aleutians, but not much in the way of any precipitation. Up to the north, Kotzebue and Wainwright picked up about 2 to 4 inches of snow today, with a couple of troughs moving across up in that area, one kind of exiting the eastern Arctic coast. Otherwise, up to an inch of snow fell Copper River Basin today, and precipitation-wise, Petersburg had about a quarter of an inch of rain. And out to the west, you can see a pretty bright cloud shield associated with the front and the next system pushing wind and rain into the western Aleutians, southwest Bering Sea. On the chart there, that front's still back toward the Komodorsky Islands here this afternoon. A couple of troughs out over the Bering Sea there, coming up over the top of a ridge down south of the Aleutians. That's keeping showery conditions, rain or snow along the southwest coast, and up into the Norton Sound area. A little more significant snow, as I mentioned, 2 to 4 inches falling from Kotzebue up to the western Arctic coast. Also pretty windy up there for the western central Arctic coast. Winds out of the south to southwest or west-southwest, depending on your location up there, of 30 to 40 miles an hour, and snow continuing to fall in those areas. Otherwise, snow showers diminishing. Again, over the Copper River Basin, diminishing over the Alaska Range, and not much else in the interior. Very light precipitation amounts in the last 12 hours. And also some showers and rain diminishing there over the Panhandle. And then you can see the warm front down to the south with that next system and the tightening gradient well south of Kodiak Island this afternoon. with a fair amount of clearing occurring over the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak, northeast Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula into the southern Kuskokwim Valley. Susitna Valley looking pretty good and starting to clear out gradually over the Madnuska Valley as well. And for tonight, areas of light snow possibly continuing over the southeast Copper River Basin may begin to increase late tonight as moisture spreads northward with that warm front that's approaching the eastern North Gulf Coast. That'll also increase the rain on the north coast late tonight, otherwise just scattered showers down farther to the south. And should stay dry south central Alaska with chilly temperatures, Madnuska, Susitna Valley up into about Nenana, and in the Kuskokwim Valley as well, Bristol Bay. Kind of variably cloudy there for Kodiak Island. Look for an increase in the clouds late tonight there coming in from the east around that associated with that warm front that's farther to the east. Gale force winds and rain pushing slowly eastward there across the western Aleutians, not quite making it to Adak and Atka tonight. And then that trough keeps it unsettled and kind of showery there for the southwest coast up into Norton Sound. And snow and blowing snow, high surf advisory, winter weather advisories continue for the western Arctic coast, as well as the central Arctic coast as well. Downsloping off the Brooks Range and North Slope there will probably keep it dry over the eastern Arctic coast. And for tomorrow, snowy, but winds possibly diminishing there along the Arctic coast. Looks like a little bit slacker gradient, but not so for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline. Dry over the interior. Good low pressure moving up in toward the Gulf of Alaska throughout the day. That's going to start spreading moisture westward. Right now it's kind of hard to tell how far west it'll get. Probably cutting off at the Chugach Mountains area in the Madnuska Valley. Kenai Peninsula probably won't reach western Cook Inlet or into Cook Inlet, but it could. More likely, though, the snow into the Copper River Basin, snow on the increase for the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country, rain moderate to heavy at times with gale force winds for the North Gulf Coast, north coast of the Panhandle, and lighter amounts of rain as you head south, and then gale force winds and rain pushing into the central Aleutians, but light winds over the eastern Bering Sea under basically ridging high pressure from south of the eastern Aleutians there right up into the Seward Peninsula, making for pretty good conditions over the interior as well with light winds and partial clearing. And then for Thursday, big area of mostly clear skies, chilly temperatures over the southwest part of the state up along the Yukon River there to the eastern Brooks Range. Areas of snow continue as several troughs continue to rotate around a big low that's up over the Arctic there. And that'll continue to produce periods of snow and locally gusty winds with each passing trough there. Flurries could extend down to the northern Seward Peninsula. Areas of snow for the eastern interior, slowly diminishing in the afternoon, but won't end before Thursday night there. And rain over the northern Panhandle, and then fog, rain, and drizzle, kind of warm front weather spreading up again. Another warm front there affecting the southern Panhandle. Gale force winds, rain, moderate to heavy at times, Alaska Peninsula, and stays wet with a big low there just east of Atka Island. And then the winds increase once again over the western Aleutians up to gale force there out of the northwest. And possible rain and snow showers along, well, mostly over Nunivak Island, dry along the southwest coast. Lows tonight, 40s for the Panhandle, teens Copper River Basin, 20s elsewhere, except upper 30s for Kodiak Island. And around Homer, near 30. Highs tomorrow, 30s to maybe near 40. Lower 40s for Homer, Seldovia. Mid-40s, Kodiak Island. And 50s to near 60 over the Panhandle, followed by lows in the 40s to mid-50s for the southeast coast. Lows mostly in the 20s, interior Alaska to near freezing around Homer, 36 for Kodiak. And then highs right around 32 for portions of the Kuskokwim Valley and Copper River Basin, upper 30s to lower 40s, south central Alaska, Kenai Peninsula. Highs in the 50s for the Panhandle. Up to the north there, low 0 to 10 in the Brooks Range, otherwise 20s for the Arctic coast. And south of the Brooks Range, some areas in the, it looks like Northway could drop into the teens. And then highs tomorrow, mostly in the 30s, followed by lows dropping a little below 0 there for Arctic Village, otherwise lower to mid-20s for the Arctic coast. And upper teens to mid-20s south of the Brooks Range, followed by for Thursday afternoon highs in the teens for the Brooks Range, up into the lower 30s for the central and western Arctic coast, and 30 to 35-ish there for the central interior Seward Peninsula area. Lows in the 30s For the southwest coast, Aleutians, Bering Sea, highs 40s to lower 50s for Wednesday afternoon, followed by lows again 30s to lower 40s, warmest in the Aleutians, highs mostly 45 to 50.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Wednesday morning, flying weather graphic showing IFR, central western Arctic coast, marginal VFR for the Brooks Range into the upper Yukon Valley, and then kind of along the mid and lower Yukon River, VFR for the Yukon Delta northward across Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew Island, Pribilofs, and Atka Island, all VFR, as well as Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. And Tusquam Mountains, though, marginal VFR, but Iliamna Lake and the Alaska Range, all VFR into the mid-Tanana Valley, south central Alaska VFR, and some IFR over the Copper River Basin early, and then some IFR just off the north coast of the Panhandle, and then the western system there spreading IFR into the western Aleutians. And for the afternoon, Wednesday, not much change up north there, except some marginal VFR now south of the Brooks Range, in across the Noatak, part of the Kobuk, and most of the Koyukuk valleys, but improving over along the Yukon River there, and VFR. Susitna Valley, Cook Inlet, but marginal VFR creeping in to Portage area, and IFR spreading across all of Prince William Sound and over the eastern Copper River Basin, all of the North Gulf Coast and most of the Panhandle into the IFR with all that moisture flowing northward with that storm system, and then out to the west, another band of IFR making its way eastward to the central Aleutians, marginal VFR on either side of that band. And for the Thursday morning time frame, a lot of IFR out over the southwest Bering Sea, western Aleutians, and then along the frontal boundary east of Atka Island spreading into Nikolsky, marginal VFR to False Pass and the Pribilof Islands, otherwise VFR, northern Bering Sea, southern Seward Peninsula, all the way down southeast and south Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula becoming VFR for Prince William Sound as the moisture starts to shift off to the east. IFR, though, north of the eastern Alaska Range, covering Northway, Tok, maybe Chicken, southward across the eastern Copper River Basin, all of the Panhandle, and then some IFR there up over the Koyukuk Valley areas, otherwise marginal for the North Slope and the Brooks Range. Thursday afternoon, marginal VFR, North Slope, Arctic Coast, Brooks Range, into Kotzebue, Noatak Valley, Kobuk Valley as well, right down to near the Yukon River there. Then some more marginal VFR lingering over the Tanana Valley to the mostly the north side of the Alaska Range, but some of that spilling down across the Talkeetnas. Not too bad for the North Gulf Coast, some lingering marginal VFR in the Coast Range there. Panhandle, marginal VFR now, southern Bering Sea from the Pribilof south to the Alaska Peninsula, all of the Aleutians IFR. Passes Anatuvik and Adigan for the Brooks Range, marginal VFR for the day Wednesday. But good VFR, Lake Clark and Merrill, rainy VFR. And for windy, also looking good, VFR flying there. Isabel starting out VFR, but with the moisture coming up from the south and southeast, trending toward marginal VFR into the latter part of the afternoon. Mentasta, more in the thick of it, marginal VFR to IFR later in the day. That's the trend. And for Tanita, VFR, but increasing chances of marginal VFR on that eastern entrance through the afternoon. And for Portage, VFR to start, IFR to finish, especially on the eastern entrance. And Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR to IFR during the morning hours through the afternoon. Freezing levels, quite a gradient there across the Panhandle, 2 to 10,000 feet at the surface, so all the way down to Shelikof Strait and right along the southwest coast, just north of St. Lawrence Island, 2 to 4,000 feet over the western Aleutians. And icing, big plume of moisture coming northward on southerly flow, so quite an area of considerable moderate rime icing from, say, eastern Prince William Sound, just about all the North Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle. And then with the front out there to the west, some considerable moderate rime icing, mostly above 7,000 feet there. Crossing the central Aleutians, otherwise pretty much icing free elsewhere. And for the jet stream, 90 to 135 knot southwest winds ahead of that low over the Yukon Delta. And at 9,000 feet, southwest 70 knot winds, upper trough right over south central Alaska. And 70 knotters into the northern panhandle, west 40 over the Aleutians. 65 knots southwest winds there, diminishing as they hit the coast, and then 50 knots out of the south across the central Aleutians. Turbulence, considerable moderate chop, eastern Arctic coast, Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, northern panhandle, and the Aleutians.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. Thanks. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children, you can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, AKwx, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is AKwx, and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, AKwx, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS. And she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're moving
cool.
the water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
there's
these,
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way, so people can, you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face, rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
No, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach, that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right? You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right. Right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound. And if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down. And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami.
Right.
Or something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before. So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about EPSCoR, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKEPSCOR, right? EPSCoR, Alaska EPSCoR, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation, so more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And for the marine forecast for the south coast of the Panhandle, small craft advisories for Wednesday, south winds 25 to 30 knots. Gale warnings on the north coast, east-southeast winds 35 knots, these up to 12 feet. And for the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area, south winds 20 knots, gusts 35 knots, and southeast 20, gusts 35 for Stevens Passage. Southeast winds at 20 with 4-foot seas for Clarence Strait. And for the Thursday outlook, gale warnings for Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, south winds 35 knots. Otherwise, central southern inside waters, winds will be southeast at 30 knots with 6-foot seas. Gales along the south coast, southwest winds 35 knots, and west-southwest winds 30 to 35 knots with seas as high as 20 feet for the north coast. And for Cook Inlet, tomorrow, north winds 20 to 30 knots, north winds 30 knots for Kamishak Bay. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands, northeast winds 35 knots, and for the North Gulf Coast, gale warnings, east-northeast winds 35 to 40 knots. Prince William Sound, winds will be northeast at 25 knots with 6-foot seas. And for Thursday, for Cook Inlet, north winds 15 to 20 knots, seas 4 to 5 feet. North winds 30 knots for Kamishak Bay, northwest 30 knots for the Barren Islands. For the North Gulf Coast, look for northerly winds at 20 to 25 knots, seas at about 11 feet. And Prince William Sound, winds will be basically north at 15 knots with 3-foot seas. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, north winds 35 knots on Wednesday. For the Alaska Peninsula, north winds 10 to 25 knots, strongest there on the Pacific side of the peninsula. And northeast winds 15 knots with 4-foot seas for Bristol Bay. And then for Thursday, gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula, east-southeast winds increasing 30 to 35 knots, northeast at 25 for Bristol Bay with 6-foot seas. Kodiak Island looking at northerly winds at 20 knots with 5 to 10-foot seas. And for Wednesday, for Unalaska Island, variable to north winds 10 to 15 knots. Unimak Island, south to southwest winds increasing to 25 to 30 knots. Gale warnings for Atka, Adak, and Amchitka Island for south winds at 40 knots. And then from Kiska to Shemya, winds will be southwest at 30 knots. Gale warnings from Shemya to Kiska on Thursday, winds will be northwest, sustained at 35 knots. Small craft advisories for Amchitka, Adak, and Atka. West winds 25 to 30 knots. Gale warnings for the Fox Islands for south to southeast winds at 30 to 40 knots with 10 to 18 foot seas. And for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, northwest winds at 15 knots Wednesday. Yukon Delta Coast, light variable winds at 10 knots. And pretty light west breeze there for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, out of the west at 10 knots. And south 15 for the Pribilofs. Southeast winds 15 knots for St. Matthew Island. And for Thursday, gale warnings for the Pribilofs, east winds increasing to 40 knots with seas building to 14 feet. Gale warnings also out for 35 knot east winds for St. Matthew Island. Southwest coast, east-northeast winds 30 knots with 8-foot seas. St. Lawrence Island, north at 15, and Norton Sound, north winds at 10 knots. For the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast on Wednesday, small craft advisories, southwest winds 30 knots, seas around 10 feet. And for the western Arctic coast to Cape Thompson, winds will be west at 30 knots with 11-foot seas. Cape Thompson to Wales, west winds 20 knots. And for Thursday, Wales to Cape Thompson, northwest winds 15 knots. And from Cape Thompson and the western Arctic coast area, north to northwest winds at 20 knots. Central coast, west winds at 20 knots. And eastern Beaufort Sea coast, west winds 20 to 25 knots with seas running 6 to 7 feet. And for tonight, blowing snow. Winter weather advisory, high surf advisory remains out through Wednesday night, actually, for the western and central Arctic coast with additional snowfall. Snowfall in the interior will be much lighter and more scattered, and a weak trough keeps it unsettled there. Yukon, Kuskokwim Delta, Nulato Hills, and rain and snow on the increase from the North Gulf Coast late tonight and into the southeast Copper River Basin. Wind and rain push to the central Aleutians tomorrow with the next front out in the Bering Sea. Big low heads northward, spreading moisture westward to right around the Chugach Range by tomorrow afternoon, with heavy rain along the North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle for flood watch. Winter storm warning out for the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country. Otherwise, interior Alaska looking pretty good. Stays breezy and snowy for the Arctic coast and western North Slope, possibly in the Noatak Valley. That's all.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.